And then there we go. So let me welcome you. Stephen Fetter here from United in Learning at the General Counsel Office, and delighted to be able to welcome you back again. Happy New Year to all of you who are joining us. And welcome to those of you who've just joined us from YouTube as well, and from those of you who will be watching the recording of this event after we begin too. We're glad that you're here and glad that you can be a part of this. Friends who are in Zoom, let me remind you that if you want to enable the closed captioning, you can do that, and you don't even need to ask me to do it anymore. You can do it yourself. So move your mouse over the Zoom screen, and if you don't see an icon called captions at the bottom of the screen, click the more button. It has 3 little dots, and then you can start the captions. They're not perfect, but they sure are a lot better than not being able to hear. So good luck with that, and let me know how it goes, but it should work for you pretty well. Welcome to Eric and Clyde, who are back giving leadership again tonight, and I'm just going to turn things right over to Eric. So over to you.
Well, thank you, everybody.
There are accusations of political interference in the judicial system.
I'm just going to mute a few microphones here, Eric, so that we're not running interference.
Yeah, well, that's not me.
No, it wasn't. I understand. I know who it was, and I'm not saying.
Fair enough. So, folks, we're calling this one Annual Tasks and More Insurance. So I have a lot to report on those things. Steve and I will be doing most of the talking, but Clyde and Angelica are here as subject matter experts and will be weighing in and, of course, fielding your questions. So, as you know, I always post the creed and then confuse you by doing a land acknowledgement instead. But they're both equally important here as we gather. So if you could just take a moment to reflect on where you are. We are in very snowy Toronto here, where we acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We're grateful for the opportunity to live and work here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. This recognition must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. Tonight, we're going to cover, again, just stuff you might have read in the paper, or we're answering a number of questions. We got suggestions from people, but just the latest government news and CRA things, and our current take on those. Not everything's finalized. There's some discussion papers out there. There's proposals and so on. And we've got a lot of new information online that you should be aware of. And some HR reminders, and then, of course, an update as we roll out the insurance program. I'll talk way more about that. Now, at the end of the session, Steve is going to take us through a bit of a briefing on the financial or the strategic plan for the denomination. And literally, this is a first cut at a focus group almost. We really need your input as to what would be the highest impact things to do to help improve things for all of us. So the first thing, you may have heard or heard in other settings, the disbursement quota has been increased effective January 1 from 3.5% to 5%. This does not affect any church. Disbursement quota more or less went away in 2010, but it still does apply. This is a serious matter for foundations that perhaps just have investments and do granting, and it may apply to an extension counselor or two within the United Church, but it won't apply to anyone in a congregation setting where your program spending is way more than that by any measure.
So, Eric, I'm sorry, that's a technical term and I don't know what it means. Can you help us?
Well, the disbursement quota, well, I'm going to say almost no to that. It basically is a measure of how much money you have to spend to maintain charitable status, and you have to spend at least this percentage of your investments. And every church, even if whether it has investments or not, you'd have to have like 100 million investments before this even starts to kick in. The next item is there's also a discussion paper put out right now from the Charities Directorate and the CRA relating to trying to be more flexible with allowing charities to work with non-qualified donees. I'm still in the process of drafting the United Church response to that, but so far at least the definitions and such are so tight that it's unlikely to be all that helpful to most of us. Another question we've had is, are charities, is a church eligible for the carbon tax rebate that individuals can claim? And the answer is no, it is an individual tax credit. And then finally, the federal government, through certain agencies, does have a grant program available right now. And I'm going to just give you a few more details on it right now. Here we go. So the Community Services Recovery Fund, $400 million. The key point is charities, and that means churches are eligible. And it's talking about adapting to pandemic recovery. So, there's a nice wording and a key role and persistent complex, so all that stuff. The real test for us is, will religious organizations qualify? And as I've said before on some of our other grant programs, the more of a community hub or the more community supports or services you provide in your building, the better the better your chances for qualifying for a grant. The language is helpful. It does say that charities, it does say we're eligible, but religious bodies historically haven't quite fit here. So I've just taken a few things from the menu to give you a sense that they're asking for ways that you've had to adapt for service delivery during pandemic. So, clearly our services have had to adapt, but purchasing equipment to allow folks to participate. There might be some ideas here. I'm not promising anyone that this is apply and you're in type program, but it might be worth, if you have folks who are comfortable writing grant applications, it might be helpful. And basically these applications, this is right from the website. It focuses on people, processes, and program innovation. So it's there. I'm not saying everyone rush to this, but if you do apply for grants, you might want to try this one. So here's, I'm starting to get some suggestions. This is from Barbara Mancher, who was very excited. I think she was doing she must be one of the first ones to be doing her charitable return online already. Kudos to her if that's the case. But she wrote in to report that the T1235, which is the listing of trustees that we always complain about because you have to fill in all the information for all your trustees and directors every year. And she was delighted to find that the online record is there and you can edit it. So she was really pleased with that. A couple of reminders for anyone that might be new. Do not input end dates for your volunteers unless they've ceased serving. So many people run into problems where they if you put end dates on, the CRA basically won't talk to you because all these people, they say they're no longer authorized. So only do that if someone dies or leaves the church. Also, Clyde has told you in past sessions that it's good to have at least 2 people authorized on your My Business account. Okay, talking about government things and stuff. Sorry, I flipped the screen there. For those of you who have church loans, COVID loans, sorry, I'm really fast here tonight. They are to be repaid this year if you want them to be interest-free and qualify for the $500 credit that we're allowing here. So there's quite a number of you who've done this program. Just a reminder that it ceases to be interest-free December 31st. More importantly, the CEBA loans are interest-free. And CEBA are the larger loans that the government was sponsoring for $40,000 or $60,000 with a significant forgiven amount if you pay off in time. If anyone out there, and this will be a message I'll be spreading broadly in the church, if there's a problem or a challenge repaying the CEBA loan on time, we strongly recommend that you reach out to the region and to us at the denominational office to swap out your commercial loan. Like, get the money to pay off the loan, either $30,000 for a $40,000 loan or $40,000 for a $60,000 loan. Even if you continue to have a loan, it'll be at a lower interest rate and allow you to qualify for the grant. So this is for CEBA loans and isn't applicable, of course, to the church loans, which are slightly different. Okay. So hopefully all of you here, or most of you here, are registered for ChurchX, and we'll be sending out some more promotional and educational material on this, but strongly recommend this, not only because the church treasurer webinar series is here, but also a whole bunch of resources. One of the great advantages of ChurchX is that you can find the resources. So this is going to be the new home for all our webinar slides and recordings, but also custom webinars like T3010 completion rebates. We did those last year. Both the recording and the slides are here, and there will be more technical areas. And there's so many new treasurers out there that, what I'm saying is, get yourself on my business account, get yourself on Church Hub, and come to ChurchX for the educational materials. Okay, just a quick reminder, most of you have probably done your budgets by now, but the COLA for 2023 it is 3.4%, and the mileage reimbursement 55 cents per kilometer.
Okay, Eric, sorry, COLA is a technical term too, and there's probably a newbie here or two that doesn't know what you mean.
Okay, cost of living.
It's not a drink.
Yeah, fair enough. Steve keeps me honest on these. Cost of living adjustment, and this applies to the ministry minimums. It doesn't necessarily apply to lay salaries or unless it's contractual, even ministry salaries above the minimum. But it is a number that many churches use, at least as a starting point for determining what kind of cost of living adjustment they would award. And for any ministers that are at the minimum or whose compensation is tied to the minimum, some percentage over, this is an automatic increase. I also have there's a lot of great information on the website for this, and there's the web link for you. Okay, one of the questions we've had a few questions come up on the notion of how can you process cost of living or salary changes before the budget has been approved by the congregation. And that's taking a very strict and literal notion that the congregation is approving, every nuance and every number. In most settings, and certainly at my church, and frankly, every one I've dealt with, the board approves compensation changes for January, and the congregation approves the overall budget a bit later. I think this makes a ton of sense because any cost of living increases anyway are non-negotiable. They're part of, they're just mandated. And waiting for an annual meeting, anything that creates more work for the treasurer, I'm against. So the idea of having to do backdating and that kind of thing, I would actively discourage. Although again, the folks making the argument aren't wrong. If you're approving a budget, is it for the whole year and all that kind of thing? In short, the board has to be trusted to do its job. Okay, now moving on to Angelica has assembled some really helpful payroll reminders, and I guess a key element is for those of you who want to keep going on a run as is basis, and if you make any changes, please validate and approve. That's if it isn't validated or approved when there's a change, it won't revert back. It won't revert to the auto process. So a very key reminder there for you. That obviously applies to new employees and so on. The detail that I'm listing here is intended to be a reference guide for you and for the slides. Again, it's strongly recommended that you verify that the payroll is processed after 3 p.m. local time on your input day. If your payroll was not processed, this is just an additional control just to make sure things work, because we know they don't always, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, another area where we've been causing more work for each other is where certain mandatory fields, as shown on this slide and as shown in the additional employee information tab, is just making sure we get employee status and key values input. When we don't do this, the minister or the employee may not see it on a paycheck right away, but there's a greater risk of data integrity around their benefits and pension. And really, we just need to get this right the first time, and most of it doesn't have to be file maintained after that. So an area where we've had a fair bit of information, and all treasurers on this call should have gotten direct communication on whether they were impacted by the cost of living zones, any changes. That study was complete, and as we shared last time, will take effect July 2023. That's trying to find the balance between recognizing the cost of living for impacted ministry staff, and at the same time also the expense challenge for congregations. So it's effective July 2023. There's a whole bunch of information now, including this communication listing of which specifically literally a pastoral charge by pastoral charge, which one's impacted and so on. And the key is to process that salary change with ADP before your first July payroll run. Again, for the normal changes, which should be water under the bridge by now, you would have input your changes effective January for cost of living and otherwise, checking if the minister's moved up in an increment category, and then July we will have a further change this year. And again, we have some links on that webpage that I referenced earlier. Now, I mentioned the importance of double checking. We did have we process over 50,000 pay deposits annually, over 1,200 payroll runs, and we had, or I should say we, but certainly ADP had a system flaw in their processing for their annual update of pension adjustments, which seemed to override 38 pastoral charges, and over 100 folks weren't paid in late December. It happened, apology, there's a waiver of fees, all those kinds of things. But the part I would shout out to is Angelica herself, and I mean, I was receiving the emails around Christmas time, and Angelica and some of her team, even though the office was closed, were all over this to try to minimize the impact, and steps have been taken to make sure it doesn't happen again. But for transparency, we want to share with you that it did happen, and that we hope to have learned, well, we hope to have learned from it and taken the appropriate preventative measures. So there are, here, as we provide each time, are the contact points for the pastoral charge team, and we'll have individual ones later on. I'll stop there for any questions or comments, Steve, that have come up so far.
Yeah, almost none at this point, but that's okay. Back up right to the beginning when you were filing the T3010 and the T1235. Liz says, if one of our directors passes away, do we just remove their name or do we put an end date beside it?
Well, you could do either. I mean, technically, I wonder if Clyde has a view. I would remove them as opposed to, like, it just strikes me as odd putting an end date of death. So I would remove them. But the one thing you shouldn't do is put an end date where someone's considering. A lot of people put January 1 to December 31, and that messes things up for a long time.
Great. Thank you.
Just to carry on, and I will make a comment on it. The CRA prefers you to put an end date in and on the final year, because that takes the name off their systems properly. And then you go the next year, you just drop them from the listing.
Okay, so the first year after they've gone, you put an end date on their file, and the second year you just remove them completely. Thank you.
And that doesn't matter whether the end date is because of death or because they've no longer in that position.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think most folks on this call probably know, but all kinds of folks were, it was a fairly common problem to say, hey, they were volunteers from Jan 1 to December 31 or from AGM to AGM. And having a termination date meant that nobody could get information from the CRA without a re-registration process. So lesson learned.
Great, thank you. Next question is about the cost of living groups. And a couple of people are wondering, what about ministers who have a manse? Does this mean that there's no change in that minister's salary 1st of July?
Angelica or someone might want to jump in, but a manse is the special case where they already have a taxable benefit that they get to write off. So I don't believe there's an adjustment for manse situations. But I'm looking for a confirmation.
Angelica, do you want to add to that?
You are correct, Eric. I was just trying to answer through the chat. There is no adjustment.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. No, Angelica, it's really helpful if you answer orally because the chat is not visible to people who are watching the recording. So if you have an answer that you can say publicly, that helps everybody. Thank you. So Marion is asking if you could say a little bit more about this validating the payroll process. She's surprised. Are you saying that the COLA changes I made will not be processed unless I do some validation thing? What do I have to do?
It's not about, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Angelica.
Yeah, it's not about revalidating, but it's just to go over and approving all the changes that you have made. What has happened, what we are experiencing is that when changes are made, they're left and not validated and approved for the process, for the payroll to be processed.
Great, thank you. Somebody here, and I'm scrolling through, I didn't copy it, was asking, where do I find a copy of that letter if I didn't get it, that letter to treasurers about the cost of living grouping? And the link is in the PowerPoint slides.
Yeah,
so,
and it's there's a sample letter on the web page reference there. All the materials are on the web page, including a complete listing of any impacted pastoral charges.
Okay, and Angelica's put the link in the chat there. Thank you, Angelica. So what do we have to do to validate and approve? David says, I still don't understand. Is there a button that's supposed to be pushed? You input the changes and then what happens, Angelica? What's the process for them?
There should be a tab when you're processing, entering all of your changes on TeamPay, you should be approving all of the information you're entering. And so if you're having some challenges, we would be more than happy to assist you. So if you can just send me an email and I can walk you through the process.
Okay. And do you have to validate it every month or just when you're making changes, Angelica?
When you're making changes. So
Okay.
January and February, just a reminder for everyone, there's quite often very annual changes. So the pension adjustment upload, that's one. The changes in salary for ministers are other. So it is important and critical that you, every time on the January, February, even March, just double check all your entries and approve all your payrolls, just to ensure of the data integrity. That's it.
Okay. So Rob, thank you. Rob is saying our CRA directors list hasn't been updated for years. What's the recommended way to remove those that are no longer in that role?
Well, I think if you, Clyde said that they like to see names come off with a termination. Maybe for this year, you literally put an end date, even if it's an old end date. Personally, I'd be tempted to just leave them off and submit a current list. But Clyde, what would you do?
If you've got a fair number of them on your listing now that they're no longer around and haven't been for years, I would just drop them off.
Mhm.
They're looking for people that are no longer on as of the middle of the year you're reporting in.
That makes sense. One of my trustees died in July, for example. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, Steve.
So continuing to get questions about this validation button, Angelica, and I guess rather than go around it again, I would say Angelica's advice to just check the payroll and make sure it's coming off properly in the beginning months of the year makes sense. And if it's not, and you can't figure out why not, reach out to her. But I don't think we should take more time from 127 people for that, because probably 115 of us are understanding it. But that's why Angelica's here. And so reach out to her directly, and her email address will be on the slides at the end of our presentation tonight. Somebody was asked the following: if our minister is compensated well and above the salary table, do we still have to give her another 3.4% COLA increase as well?
Well, I'm going to comment there as opposed to leaving it to HR. This gets there, frankly, inflation is greater than 3.4. It's a lag indicator the way we do it. There is the desire to be a decent employer, and I would think that we would want any of our kids or our family members to be getting at least cost of living and maybe even merit as part of that. But you can balance that against affordability and all those things. But you have to also consider the signal it sends.
It's about relationship as well as about legality, right?
Yeah, Stephen, it's Alan Hall.
Thank you, Alan.
Just to add to that, about the call or appointment terms trump. So you need to be mindful of what those terms are. And if it says minimum plus a certain percentage and the annual economic adjustment, and that's what you're bound to for the duration of the call or the appointment or the renewal of appointments.
That's a helpful reminder, Alan. So it's going to be important to go back and find those documents from the beginning of the pastoral relationship.
That's correct. And they are likely reflected in what your current practice is for salary. So if you're paying minimum plus 10%, but your regional cost of living group has changed, then you have to be paying minimum plus that percentage with the annual economic adjustment. And we've begun using or to differentiate between the annual cost of living and the regional cost of living groups. We're using annual economic adjustment to distinguish the annual inflation adjustment.
Thank you, Alan. I was called to my church in 2002. That's a long time ago to go and find that call document, but it clearly is important. I know it's on my computer somewhere. I will go looking. Liz writes, our church is beginning to search for a new minister. We've chosen to use pulpit supply until we get a new hire. One person is going to be preaching multiple times till we have a full-time minister. Should this pulpit supply person become an employee and paid through ADP? Or should we continue to pay on a weekly basis at the supply rate with no deductions?
Well, it's Eric. I'm going to say that you probably, if you're planning to have a regular person for any duration, you probably should set them up as an employee from a, and I'll be speaking to that a little bit later on this presentation as well.
Jump in on that as well. Alan Hall again. From Ministry and Employment, there are limitations on how frequently pulpit supply can preach at one location. And that varies from regional council to regional council. So you'd be well advised to check in with your regional council minister for the practice in your regional council and ensure that you don't need to do a short-term appointment, which would regularize payment and payroll and the like.
But and it's Eric, I'll just jump in to say, even with the regional policies, the test we have to watch out for, and as I say, I'll be speaking to this, is still what the CRA thinks. Mm-hmm. And if somebody's there with any regularity, they're probably a part-time employee. And of course, you set them up with a short-term call or whatever. Okay, Steve, anything else? Or
just two more, and then I think we'll go on. Denise is wondering where to find the minimum salary scales to which they should be adding the cost of living and the economic adjustment. Or is all of that quantified for both January 1 and July 1 and available yet?
Yes, it's all on. It's all on. There's treasurer tools, and there's if even I think even the web link that we have already should get you there. But you could also click on budget tools or ministry compensation at the website.
Good.
Hi there. Can I speak for a minute?
Thank you.
Denise.
Okay, Denise, quickly.
No, the question was, should I be adding those two amounts to the minimum salary scale? I know where the salary scales are, but should I be adding the cost of living and the economic, whatever the two terms were, to the minimum salary scale?
And first of all, the cost of living, yes, if the minister's at the minimum or has an arrangement where their compensation is linked, to the minimum in any way, and in terms of the cost of in terms of the regional or economic adjustment, it depends if they're impacted or not. You would have to look yourself up on the list. And if you are, the answer would be yes.
And the minimum and the schedules that are posted reflect for 2023 the annual economic adjustment. So make sure you're looking at the 2023 schedule and not the 2022 schedule. And there's
and it's all calculated out. You don't have to add anything else to it. It's all there already. So if you're paying at minimum salary, it will show you because it's been calculated.
And I just advanced the slide for no other reason than we keep talking about this. The notion of someone doing pulpit supply regularly, who plans the work? Well, it's kind of, the person has to show up there 10:30 or 11 or 10, whatever it is. Who's covering, like, basically, if they're there with any regularity, they're likely not going to meet this independent contractor definition.
Eric, remind me, how do treasurers get an account at Church Hub? Who do we direct them to? I'm forgetting.
Susan Jackson.
Susan Jackson. Okay, thank you. I'll put her name in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, may I keep going?
Please do. We're done.
So there are a number of questions on this, so I'm just doing a refresh. If you are doing honorariums, need to do a T4A if it's over $500. We covered that. We always advise to collect the social insurance number up front, even if someone says, hey, I'm only preaching once, because you don't want to have to be chasing it afterwards if circumstances change. So my strong advice is get it every time. You can say that it's our procedure and you can say why. And a T4A summary can be done manually or can be done on team pay. And for all the reasons we just covered on that chart, it's probably prudent to assume an employee relationship, which would be a T4 and be subject potentially to deductions, mainly EI if it's just $1,000 or two. A reminder, this happens every year. The CRA penalty for payroll here for being fast and loose with your handling of saying, hey, they're an independent contractor. I don't have to set them up. I don't have to do source deductions. Can be thousands of dollars of fine. It can add up pretty quickly. Okay. So there's a number of ways, and Clyde is my expert. These are his words. There's a number of people were asking, hey, how do I do a T4A? Well, you can do it on ADP. And if you do, then ADP sends the copies to the CRA electronically, as they do with T forms. Depending on your accounting software, it may have the facility to do T4As as well. And you can also do them manually and load them through your My Business account. So this is Clyde's slide. There are a number of ways to tackle this. And it really depends how you're most comfortable. Clyde, anything you would add to this?
No, sir. You did a good job of my words.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Church Hub, we just talked about getting registered. And
I've just before you leave T4As, what's the deadline for giving them to people?
February 28th.
Thank you.
Okay, we just had the question about Church Hub. Church Hub is the database the denomination uses now for all forms of communication. Like I always err on the side. We have a couple of identities that we go to great lengths to keep track of. One is treasurer, another is the main admin contact. And obviously every minister needs to be on Church Hub too. But from an administrative point of view, it's really essential to have the treasurer on there. And anyone on this call should be registered already. If they're not, please reach out to Susan Jackson. The next, there'll be a broadcast communication coming out to treasurers and the lead admin contact as registered on Church Hub next week on a whole host of matters, a number of them which we're talking about tonight. But this is a key way for us to ensure that we get to the right audience faster and better. So talking about what's on there, assessment invoices are now on there, and that's one of the things the email will be flagging. And all pastoral charges are now billed at target, and which is the whole idea of the new funding model, was that it adjusts to how things are going. And right now, that means assessments, because they're linked to revenue, assessment and revenues have been either flat or declining in most cases. So does the assessment. And there are increases for some in the eastern part of the country in 2023 as the final catch up of a 4-year phase in. But everyone for 2023 is consistent, transparent, etc. And here we just show you what the access points look like and where you go to look for your reports. And then a couple of repeat slides, just in case we have any new people. Year end is usually the time for stock gifts, but just to say the foundation is the most still the most cost-effective solution that I'm aware of. I refer people there every week. At my own church, I went through the annoying paperwork to set up a direct, a low fee direct brokerage account, and we happen to process our stock gifts. But the paperwork is a hassle, and for the modest amount that it costs, if you're only seeing 1 or 2 a year or 1 or 2 every 5 years, I strongly recommend the foundation is the way to go. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about insurance, field some questions. For those of you who are regulars, you'll know this is a repeat slide. The insurance rates have as much as doubled or more. I was talking to one treasurer whose increase this month was 85% after increases last year and the year before. And that's the reason that we've launched the self-insurance initiative. And I'll be talking about refinements to it now. But just to say, an empty building is still a problem, although we're working on some solutions. We still expect, frankly, rate increases. If the outside world is increasing premiums by 50 or 100%, our arrangement will have to increase premiums too, but hopefully not by as much. So just to say, I list this because people are always asking. There are a number of appraisal companies, updated appraisals. Almost any insurer who are really careful about their risk management will be asking for appraisals. We, on the other hand, have moderated our position, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. So we've done a few things to try to hold premiums down. For years, we've done some self-insurance where the national church bears the risk of smaller claims. Now we've invested a significant sum to create an insurance arrangement that we hope will save congregations over $1 million a year. And again, the way it works is existing participants, this is UC Protect United, as we're calling it now, will receive a new insurance certificate at renewal from AIG. There'll be a credit if you're a March renewal or a June renewal. There'll be a credit for premium savings, and when you renew your policy, you'll also be entitled to a check for premium savings from December 1st. If you don't want to participate, it is voluntary. The way you exit is by applying elsewhere. And there are a few folks who have felt very strong ties to a local broker, sometimes a member of the congregation and so on. And this arrangement one of the sources of savings is eliminating the local broker and the commissions there. So if that's the path chosen, folks would need to instruct their broker to apply elsewhere. But we do think the savings are going to be so compelling that most local brokers will say, hey, if that's the case, you should go there. So there's a lot of additional questions, FAQ and so on listed, and there's going to be more coming in the next couple of weeks, which is what I'll be writing everyone about. So the December renewal process is underway. It's been frankly, just a huge scramble. We intentionally launched for December as opposed to waiting a quarter because we wanted to get the savings underway, and December had the most policies, frankly. So there's over 500, or I guess just under 500 policies that have been renewed, and we're looking to get certificates out. And these are people that are already benefiting from the premium reductions. If you're a March renewal, you'll be looking at, on an apples to apples basis, if the values are unchanged, you'll be looking at a 30% rate reduction, but an inflation factor added back in for 5%. June, same thing. Now, one of the things that's new is we are looking to align this program to have all of it renew every December. So if you're a March person, you'll get a 9-month policy. If you're June, you'll get a 6-month policy. And new entrants will get a short-term policy too. If you apply, if you're coming from somewhere else, the first policy will take you to December 1. So that's a bit of a refinement from the earliest communication. Now, here's a couple of new things. A month ago, I said we really couldn't handle, because of having to deal with those almost 500 existing renewals, we couldn't consider new business. Now you are invited to apply. You do need to be underwritten, but you don't have to, there isn't an immediate appraisal requirement. We did have that last month. We're saying now, going forward, if you have an appraisal, we'd like to see it. It helps reinforce the replacement value amounts that we're looking to have in place. But we don't need, a number of folks were put off by the fact that they didn't want to spend $1,000 to $3,000 on an appraisal. That requirement is moved. It's deleted. We do expect to offer double-digit savings, but we can't guarantee it because it will depend who you were underwritten by, whether you have abuse coverage, which is included in this policy, that kind of thing. A reminder that Newfoundland Labrador has its own policy, and there were a limited number of BC locations where folks needed to decide whether they wanted to keep going with earthquake coverage, which wasn't available in certain select areas of BC because Intact, our main reinsurer, was maxed out on their program. So, how's this thing evolving? First of all, we need to get the 1,000 or so policies switched over. In the next few months, we're going to start looking at how we can offer more flexible coverage for situations where you might not replace your existing building. Frankly, I believe there's a lot of folks in that boat, and the insurance industry does not understand that. So we're going to see what we can do to offer a couple of more flexible options that still protect our volunteers as they lead their local church. Again, the claims arrangement will be the same. In fact, we will be referring you directly to the same claims adjusters that any big company uses. They all use independents. Third-party insurance currently is available on an automated online basis for folks who are part of the Affinity program. We do have approval to expand it to all United Church entities. We just have to provide the insurer with some kind of reference database so that it can be handled in an automated way. So look for more news on that. It's tougher and tougher to get third-party insurance at a reasonable cost. So we're hoping to expand that as soon as possible this year. So again, I've said this before, we know, and we're already seeing how we can improve service dramatically. We're already streamlining processes. There's a new computer system coming in place that in March that's going to help. And we've been rushing this along the whole way. We've told you that because the significant savings that we could deliver to every participant. So that's a quick update on the changes. The main thing I want you to take away is if you're in the program, we will have that part normalized, that transition completed with the March and June renewals. If you'd like to get a quote, we're open for business on that as well.
Okay, thank you. I've got questions on T4As and then questions on insurance. So let me deal with the T4As first. Can an employee getting a T4 also receive honorariums and get a T4A?
Clyde, do you want to answer that one? I see if my answer is the same.
Simple answer is yes. But it seems a little strange to do it.
Yeah, that would be my answer too. If it's the same quote unquote employer, I've seen people try to do this because there's the regular job, and then there's some job that's slightly different. But from a tax point of view, it's the same person. So it does look a bit odd, but the CRA hasn't said absolutely not.
Thank you. So we've had someone doing extra work for us for our music programs this past year, and I've had her invoice us for the service. She told me she normally gets a T4A from other churches as she's a self-employed artist. Hadn't heard of this. We treat her payment as an expense. Should I be issuing a T4A?
Yes, and the expense makes no difference. That's what you're going to issue it for.
Liz says, do we give T4As to every minister? I think Liz means, I'm sorry, Lisa means ministers who are doing pulpit supply or something like that. Do we give T4As to every minister, even if it's under the $500 allowance?
No. It's 500 and above. The law actually says everybody, but the administrative way of doing it says everything over $500 is where you draw it.
Thank you. And Sylvia says, we just pay our pianist a weekly check. Does she really need a T4A? What does this mean for deductions?
There are no deductions being taken, so it's reported on a T4A, whether it's paid weekly, daily, monthly, or yearly.
And the overall concept, folks, is the CRA wants their money, and there's no such thing as, like an employer. If an employer gives money to someone for a service, the CRA wants to know.
I think Sylvia also needs to look at your table, though, about whether or not this person who's playing their piano weekly is really an employee and not a contractor.
And there might at least be some gray. Presumably, this person has to be there at the same time every week and is using your piano, which is both of those are arguments for employee status. On the other hand, if they have multiple customers, you might be able to argue that they're an independent contractor.
Okay. Here's a question that has to do with assessments and a bequest. It nothing to do with what you've been talking about, but I'll throw it in there anyway. Norma says, we received a bequest late last year. The regional assessment will increase as a result. Is it a 4.5% that we should set aside as the increase, or what? How do we deal with that? How do we plan for the increase because of this bequest?
Well, first of all, a bequest is excluded, actually. So on receipt, it is something that you should flag on your reporting, and it is excluded. The balance is, to the extent that it, say, is invested, it does factor into the calculation, but typically in a very, very modest way. But bequests themselves are not assessed. That's true.
I can see Norma dancing in her kitchen, I'm sure. Thanks, Eric. So a bunch of insurance.
Well, and just to say, with a lot of discussion, but a lot of debate on that. And the thought was that to the extent that this could potentially be a disincentive to a bequest, we didn't want to do that.
Thank you. So I've got about 5 or 6 questions on insurance, and then we'll just keep plowing on. So Rob says, our insurance renewal got lost in the email somewhere. I retrieved it last week and passed it on to the trustees, but gulp, how long do we have to pay press now? How long do we have to have in order to press the button pay now? And will this have expired?
Well, it will expire at some point, and I appreciate your candor, but not yet. So all you have to do right now, that the system is set up to do catch-up billing, and at some point we're going to have to pull the plug. But certainly, if you do it this month, you'll be fine.
Okay, thank you. Ross wants to know a little more about earthquake coverage. For churches in the south coast of BC who don't have earthquake coverage through the United Church Self-Insurance Program and can't get it somewhere else, what do you recommend?
Well, first of all, I've talked to the region about this too. It's all in the eyes of the beholder, but even when there was earthquake coverage in BC, the minimum deductible was 10% of insured value, which could be like $1 million, or a minimum of 250,000. Many congregations wouldn't have been in a position to pay that or rebuild anyway. So the fundamental question is to understand the deductible that's offered, and whether that is something that's meaningful or not. There are churches that have chosen not to have earthquake coverage because in the event of an earthquake, they could not afford the deductible anyway.
So Alan says we had a December 2022 renewal, but nothing's come out of our bank account yet. What's going on?
I'm going to assume that you're with the United Church program, because if you're somewhere else, I can't answer that. But if you are, the first thing that should have happened is you should have confirmed, you should have first of all gotten the renewal email with an online button to click on to provide bank information. And if you haven't gotten that, just drop me an email really quick and I'll get you one tomorrow.
Okay, thanks. Arlene says she doesn't know whether she wants to be joining your insurance program or not. Can she get a quote and then decide?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Valerie is joining late and has a payroll question. Needs to ask about workman's comp, which I think is what she means by WCB. She says, we're now contracting our minister from another congregation. We haven't any other employees, just volunteers. Do we need to pay workman's comp?
It will depend. I think there's a couple of provinces that where it may be mandatory, but if you're in, I'm just going to say Ontario, I know best. It's optional, and that minister would be covered by restorative care somewhere, and that is actually better than workman's comp. So most congregations, it's optional, and generally you can't have it just for the custodian, for example, and therefore most congregations elect not to have it at all.
Thanks. Rob is wondering if you have any news on cyber insurance.
I have a proposal from, how to answer this. There's no chance of getting blanket cyber insurance like we had for a year. I am looking at adding it as a modest amount to the base policy. But if folks are looking for a robust program, they would need to have multi-factor authentication on their electronic systems, and probably will need to get it themselves. But we are looking at least having some educational and preventative materials and that kind of thing. But there's no chance of getting a policy to cover all congregations because we're just so uneven with where we're at on our technology.
Thanks. Last question is about a T4. I think it's about a T4A. If we're paying pulpit supply, a person doing pulpit supply, if we're paying the mileage as well as the honorarium amount, do we include the mileage portion that we paid on the T4A?
Simple response here is, do they submit a billing like for it? So you're doing mileage as a reimbursement, in which case it's not included on the T4A. But if you treat it as an allowance, then it does go on the T4A.
So you would need to get something from the pulpit supply person saying how many miles they'd actually traveled and the documentation CRA requires for that sort of thing.
That's right.
Thank you. Okay. I think there's a comment from John Morton on the screen about WorkSafe BC. It's mandatory even for the janitor. So Eric's comment that it changes from province to province is probably important, and you should check that with your regional council if you're not sure. But those are the questions, gentlemen. Go ahead.
Okay. So, Steve, over to you.
Okay. Let me erase these questions.
Maybe I'll just give you a quick lead in here.
Sure.
Hopefully folks have seen some communication. There's lots on the website, all our various newsletters about the church having an articulated mission and vision statement. And as you know, some people might be shaking their heads at that, but there have been efforts for over 30 or 40 years to do that, and that have withered away over time or something. But we finally have that, and a strategic plan aimed at a degree of renewal and changing the narrative, very much changing the narrative. So, we're using the term growth here, but we're not going to have 5,000 pastoral charges where we only have 2,500 now. But what we can and should be aiming for is new expressions of church, and we've got a very firm target of having 100 new communities of faith by 2025. And there's various very specific plans. Some of them will be online communities. It can't be the way. Some of it will be, I'm going to say, use the term mergers and acquisitions. It can't be the traditional model of an existing congregation starting like a mission unit in another neighborhood. There might be some of that, but that hasn't worked for the last 30 or 40 years. That's not what we're relying on. We see being more active in the climate justice space, in the overall justice space, continuing our Indigenous partnership journey, and a whole bunch of things where we're talking about the common good. This insurance initiative, for example, is a common good thing where if you take the view that the denomination or the national office has never done anything for you, well, we're hoping to save a collective $1 million and some thousands of dollars for every single pastoral charge. That should be something, and that's a common good. So within that, Steve has very, I don't know how he does it, but Steve has volunteered to lead some of the activities in this space and work with me, and I'm really appreciative. And he's going to talk a bit more about what we could or should be doing for you from a treasurer perspective. So Steve, with that.
Oh, thanks, Eric. I think, with my hat on as a minister in a pastoral charge, it's often really important to be able to say to people on my board or council, General Counsel has your back. And we want it to be clear and obvious that that's true. So a lot of what's going on in that fish diagram that Eric had up on the screen is trying to talk about what does it mean to be church in Canada in 2025 and how do we get there. And one of the things, the last that's in that picture, the tail of the fish is what's driving us is how do we work together for our collective benefit. So yeah, under that initiative, there are a bunch of different activities. One of them is Eric's, and he's leading that one. And the other one is this one, which for my sins, I've been asked to lead. And let me read it to you, although I put it on the screen, because I think this is important. We want to find ways to improve congregational and broader church capacity to support treasurers, that's you, and other technical roles. And when I'm thinking about those other technical roles, I'm imagining the person who purchases your computer software and the person who manages the leases for any properties you're renting and the person who's doing the administration and the person who's managing payroll and all of those kinds of things that are technical and require some technical expertise that have to do with sort of the business end of being church. What we're finding is that I think business was always complicated, and we've always in the church relied on people who brought that kind of expertise from their professional or work lives. But things are getting more and more specific, and one of the things we've learned from these webinars for church treasurers that Eric and Clyde have been doing for the last 3 years is how much people value it when we can put some of that expertise into the hands and when people can connect with each other on the chat and teach each other some of those expertise things. So we're trying to expand the experience we've had out of these treasurers webinars and include some of the other volunteers in all of your congregations, all of our congregations, who are doing related kinds of things. As I say, property, payroll, church administration, computers, all of that stuff. We want to reduce the friction costs because the more we get tied up in knots over details we don't understand, the less likely we are to be able to think about the future of our congregation or what might make it attractive to the person walking past on the street. So if we can make the business easier, more streamlined, less taxing, less time consuming, we're going to have more brain cells left over to do the real work of the church, which is to live out the reign of Christ in each of our neighborhoods. So we're just getting started on this. And Eric and Clyde have graciously agreed to be on a kind of working group planning committee with me, and that's super. Looking for a couple of volunteers from among this group who might want to join on that. But the first task that I wanted to do with you tonight for the next 10 minutes, and really not more than that, is to do just a kind of quick and dirty needs assessment. Like, where are those friction points? What are the problems you're running into? What are the places where you would really value a little more help? And think not just about your role as treasurer, but all the other people who work with you in the business of being church. And just to keep it organized, because I can't take notes while you're typing, I'm just going to pick up that chat afterwards. I'm going to put some headings in the chat, and they correspond to the headings that are going to come up on the screen. So if we can have the first slide, Eric, there, if you please. What are the friction points with respect to being the treasurer? I think those are the ones that Eric has talked about forever, but I want to capture them so that we don't lose them. And just in the chat, quickly, we'll take 2 minutes and see what comes up. What's the friction point? What drags you down? What do you want to learn more about? Payroll, ADP, workload, accounting software. This is year 14. Yes, no, you're never allowed to leave. Somebody asked me if they could get out of the registration for webinars for church treasurers, and I said, no, you're here for life, just like every other church committee.
And folks, we do know some of the answers here. We're all already working, Angelica's team on you've authorized them to be able to work with ADP data, for example, and troubleshoot that kind of thing.
And some of this we've already done in these webinars too, but brainstorming means you don't edit.
Exactly.
Brainstorming just says, let's get it down. And then Eric and Clyde and I and a couple of others will sit down and do the editing later. This is so helpful. Thank you. It's coming faster than I can read it, which is exactly what I was hoping for.
That's great.
So as let me put in the next heading here. I'm going to get my titles up on my own screen so I know. So my next category is managing payroll. So if you've got friction points in managing payroll, add them here, and I promise not to show them to Angelica. Especially the one that says, ah! Thank you, Janet.
Oops, no swearing. Please don't take Angelica away.
We want to clone Angelica is what we want to do, right?
I feel the same way about Steve and Clyde, so there we go. Should I put
Okay,
up
we'll keep going here. My next category is managing rentals and leasing. That's probably a little out of the treasurer's area, but one of the things somebody suggested to me, for example, is why can't we have some boilerplate leases for renting the Friendship Hall? I think it's a cool idea. And keep them on church checks. But what are the friction points for you in terms of managing leases and the insurance generally? The property generally. But let's just do leasing right now. God help us, says the bookkeeper. That's the plan, right? Okay. You have to find out who pays find out the market rent in your area. This is so helpful, friends.
Wow, this is good.
What about basic insurance questions? I have wondered, I mean, Eric has done a great job with this new insurance scheme, but I wondered whether it would be useful just to talk with a broker around what should we be worried about? How do we mitigate our risk? Do we talk about snow plowing and slip and fall? And, you know, I buy insurance from my house, but I've never bought one for a big property. Would it be helpful to do something like that? Maybe there's other friction points for you in insurance that are where you could find some more information. Yep, trustees are doing the insurance, so not on my plate, says Michelle. I get it, but what we're trying to do is expand the reach, because treasurers need the help just like trustees need the help just like treasurers do.
And I want to stress on this insurance and property file, we don't know who the trustees are necessarily. So we're really counting on the treasurer to forward those kinds of things along, because you know, eventually you'll pay the bills, right?
Now think about all of the folks on your property committees, people who are responsible for property management, maintenance, repairs. I'll bet you if they're like the church I'm serving in, they're all homeowners or apartment dwellers, but they don't necessarily know anything about managing bigger buildings that are bigger than a house. What are the friction points around the property in your setting? Managing keys. I love it, Laura. Thank you. Old building. Asset inventories. Credible long-term plan. No resources.
And folks, the good news is we don't have to invent stuff. And a lot of, like, there are people around the country doing a great job on each of these things. So part of what we're trying to do here is build a community and start getting as much knowledge base together under Church X to share with everybody.
So keep going with those ones, but I'm going to put the next category out, which is managing computers and technology. Like, you can't seem to do anything in church these days without computers. What are the friction points for you with your computers at the church? I think I'm going to spend the next 3 days sifting through all these comments.
Great.
I'm just gonna hit print.
Who asked me to do this, Eric?
I just keep saying thank you.
You're good at that.
This is some really good feedback that we're getting here.
Oh gosh, this is invaluable.
It really is.
It is.
Oh, I've got comments coming up at YouTube too. Replacing heating systems with heat pumps, maybe. Or web support and design.
Yeah.
Thank you, Westminster United Church in Whitby.
And maybe I could just offer a quick solution. Look up faithful footprints for that heat pump.
Okay, and my last category is a catch-all. What did I not think of? When you think about the business of doing church and the friction points that you're living with, what didn't fall into any of my categories? Time, yes. 1,000 years is but it's a day in the sight of the Lord, isn't that right?
Credit cards.
Grant writing skills. Thank you, Carol. What an interesting thought. Edge used to run workshops on that. I think they probably still do. We should connect those in. Who's the boss? Is there a boss?
Minister, chair, finance.
You got
I had
200 bosses
I had
in the
lunch with
church.
Eric the other day, and he told me there is no boss.
There's certainly no one in charge.
Automation.
There are only some people that think they're in charge, but they're not really.
No, we've got lots of those.
Yeah,
That's again where we go back to saying, God help us, right?
right.
Because if God won't, we're in real trouble. We'll leave the chat open for as long as you want to add to it, but I also don't want to take forever. We are looking for 2 or 3 church leaders, like folks like you, treasurers or trustees or administrators or bookkeepers or accountants or people who care about the business of church, looking for 2 or 3 of us to work with the 3 of us on this initiative. The other person who's going to work with us is Katja Britton from the Toronto United Church Council, who has all kinds of expertise in rentals and leases and property management. So the 4 of us so far are the group that are going to kind of take your feedback and figure out how to make it sing. But we would love to have a couple of people who are actually doing the work on the ground. I'm a minister in a church, but it's a reasonably small church because otherwise I would never have time to do all these webinars. We need some help from folks in different parts of the country in different size churches. If you'd like to be part of this, let me know. Give me an email, and there's my email on the screen. We'd love to include you in this.
Yeah, and we can even, if there's more people, we can have, even just an advisory council or focus groups. There's, if you want to tell us what the church should be doing, we'll find a way to listen.
Yeah, this is primarily a staff job, right? We pay for this kind of work. So what I'm imagining from volunteers is advisory work and maybe a meeting a few times a year to kind of hear where we're going and do some brainstorming together with us. And then as much more as you want to jump in with, but that's the ask, is come and tell us what we're missing. Help us to understand what's most important.
And folks may want to even just reflect on that for a day or two, Steve, but
Absolutely. I'm not asking for it now. You have got my email address. Give me a call. Thank you, friends, for your overwhelming feedback. I will have fun reading it all, but not tonight.
Okay, and here's our usual list of, we've tried to set up email boxes, generic ones, so that multiple people can help out in responding during peak periods, and also so that we have a nice audit trail of getting back to people. So here are the most common ones that if you're new to this webinar series that you should have, just put off to the side somewhere or taped to the wall. The folks that you've been hearing from tonight, here's our contact information. Emails, there will be times, often just after a webinar, where it may take some days to get back to you. We tend to be very popular the next morning. Steve has pointed out that our February webinar falls on Ash Wednesday, and we're thinking that we'll skip this meeting and resume in June, and we'll update the church.
Resume in March. Or not.
June.
You're feeling hopeful there, but I won't let you get away with that much.
In the interim, we're getting a few suggestions for custom webinars, perhaps one on regaining, obtaining or regaining charitable status, or maybe even the online T3010 filing. Custom stuff like that we might record separately so that we have it available when we next meet. But right now the idea is to not try to schedule around or get the word out on different dates, and we thought we'd skip February.
Okay. The minister in me thanks you for that, since I have to be down at the church putting ashes on people's foreheads.
There we are. And then again, just to close with a big thanks for the generosity of your time, your commitment to the church. And as I always say, treasurers just aren't thanked often enough. I don't think everyone realizes just what a huge job it is to attend to all the details and the compliance and the evolving circumstance. So thank you very much for what you do for your own church, for our whole church. And that's what I have.
Okay, well, thank you, friends. That what a great evening, and helpful information as always, Eric and Clyde, and then all of these suggestions at the end. I think we've struck a nerve, and it's exciting to me to see how it's all going to come together. So we will not meet on February 22. We will meet on March 22. I will send out an email to the full registration list at ChurchX for that. So you should get an email from me, probably more than one, reminding you of that. And we'll also see if we can piggyback on Eric's email blast that's going out to treasurers sometime soon as well. Thank you for joining us. Eric and Clyde and Angelica, if you just hang on a second, I haven't created the groups yet, but I'll just take us out into a breakout room so that we can connect with each other. And I will say good night to the rest of you. Happy Robert Burns Day and happy Ash Wednesday, and we'll see you in the spring.
And then we'll go snow shoveling.
There you go. I'm going to have some supper first, but sounds like a plan.
Thank you.